Hello, ladies and gentlemen, two minds of America. Today's debate focuses on a feud between two economic systems, socialism and capitalism. Basically, how this is going to work is we have two people here with us today creating an argument for each economic system and why it is preferable. I will give each contestant 1 minute to give a very brief overview on what their system they're representing is, and then I will get into some questions. With the questions, they will each have anywhere from 1 to 2 minutes, depending on their answer, and then the other contestant will be allowed about the same amount of time to give their rebuttal. If we feel we need to expand on something, we will continue to let the contestants debate on that question until we feel it has run its course and that we should move on. Before we introduce the contestants, I would like to remind the audience that we are high school students and that our opinions may change over time, and that anyone with their opinion should not be discriminated against for any reason. Each of us are entitled to our own opinions, legally and morally, and we shouldn't be penalized for voicing them. Okay, with that being said, let's get to our first contestant here representing the Defense for Capitalism. We have Erika Applebaum. You may give your brief opening.
All right, capitalism is the belief that it is a free market economy, no major government interventions and stuff like that, along with very limited taxes and items such as that.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Eric. And now here representing the Defense for Socialism, we have Kyle Nagy.
Yes. Okay, so first of all, I want to talk about the differences between certain economic terms, like communism, democratic socialism, and social democracy, right? Because socialism is any of the various economic and political theories advocating for collective or government ownership and administration of means of production and distribution of goods. Now, this applies in several ways to different ideologies and economic theories. Communism is when the goods are owned in common and are available to all as needed. I'm not really in favor of that system. I'm more in favor of democratic socialism or social democracy, in which you are achieving a socialist system through democratic means and have large capitalist integration. So that's what I will be arguing mostly here today. And I think that's a brief overview of what I got.
All right, thank you, Mr. Nagy. Welcome to both of you. Now, I have given both of these contestants roughly a week to prepare. They must use whatever information they have found, but they also must say where they have used it from. They really don't have to. It just helps prove their argument. So with that being said, we're going to get into some questions. All right, this first one goes out to you, Kyle. Kyle, what do you say to those who may fear socialism because of what they believe it has done to other countries such as Venezuela?
Okay, well, first of all, when you look at other countries that have been, torn apart by socialism, you look at countries like Venezuela, which aren't strong ideals of what anyone in America is truly advocating for. There are some people out there who want to watch the world burn, but nobody wants a system in which there's going to be famine. Usually, the people in America who are advocating for democratic socialism or social democracy want some form of socialist integration into the current system that we have. And on top of that, Venezuela had other problems besides the fact that they decided to go with socialism as their main focus economically. They have horrible mismanagement since in the more recent years, they've had horrible mismanagement, and for decades, they've been facing heavy U.S. sanctions. Now, if you look at other countries in which social democracy has been implemented, like Denmark, it works. You have, when you look at their healthcare system, they pay much less per capita than an American would. And that's because their government runs their healthcare system.
All right, thank you. I will allow now a rebuttal from our other contestant, Eric.
So you're saying that just because the system that you're going for, which is still socialism that you wish for, we should not look at the countries that have been ravaged by socialism, which in Venezuela, the currency is worth about 10 cents for one Venezuelan dollar, which the inflation's high already. And then how about we look back in history? We have the USSR, the inflation there. Look at all the countries that came out of that. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. They are just now beginning to recover their economy because of the socialism that was running it. If it was a capitalist society, there may have been a much greater chance of them not being forced to have to regrow their economy in this way.
Okay, now you bring up the USSR and the former Soviet republics. and you go back to Venezuela again. As I just said, we're not looking at communist states. We're not looking at the rough idea that the Americans have of a socialist state. We're not looking for a dictatorship in which one person has everything to say about all this sort of stuff. We're looking at a democracy in which socialist policies are implemented, and that is much less vulnerable to things like mismanagement, which have killed the Venezuelan economy and tore apart the Soviet Union. Plus, the Soviet Union was going for a communist system, which, like I said, that is where the goods are owned in common and available to those as needed. I'm not advocating for that. I'm still advocating for having a monetary economy. I just want one in which the people and the middle class and the lower class are helped more by the government.
But actually, the Soviet Union wasn't actually communist, because as it is said in the Communist Manifesto, I know this, you cannot have a government with a communist society. They were socialist, and what you are still advocating for is the implementation of socialist ideals in a capitalist society. America is built on on work for your goods, work for your money. You are advocating more for socialism in there.
Can I just
Okay,
get one more thing before we move
one
on?
more thing, and then we're just going to move on. We've already spent a lot of time on this question.
Classical Marxism, which you are talking about in saying that, the Soviet Union wasn't a true socialist, it wasn't a true communist state, it was more of a socialist state. Classical Marxism is the pure example of what the Soviet Union was, until eventually it got edited by certain people like Trotsky and Lenin and Stalin, but that's besides the point. Classical Marxism is very different from any sort of social democracy that works.
All right, thank you. And now we're going to move on to our next question, which is for Eric. Eric, some say that socialism is preferable because it would provide benefits to the working class Americans, them, being the majority. What, in your opinion, could you possibly find wrong with this?
Let's see. If we look back in history again, which is always doomed to repeat us unless we learn from it, in the USSR, it was stagnation, starvation all across the country. If we look in Venezuela, famines, electricity shortages. How about we just look all the way back in Hungary when, they dared to talk bad about the socialist government in charge. They were put down and they were shot. Socialism, with it being, it's just not good for humanity to be a socialist state because of what the history has done. Even if we look at China in modern day, that's not even what you would consider a socialist state. That is a capitalist market economy, but it's just everything is run by the government. It's still free choice, but it's just the government has final say in everything.
All right, and I'll allow a short time for your rebuttal.
I'd like to go back again. You mentioned the Soviet Union as your pure example of famine. Look at Denmark real quick. Is there famine in Denmark?
No, but that is because they're in a free trade union with the rest of the European Union.
Yes, they have a free market and free trade most of the time, but then they have various areas which aren't free market capitalist societies. They have, their healthcare system, which is a socialist healthcare system. They have socialized medicine in Denmark, and they pay about half as much per capita as an American would in our heavily competitive capitalist medical system. They, in the areas where Denmark has a socialist economy, they thrive. And we're not looking at societies like the Soviet Union, which use authoritarianism more than they use socialism. We're looking at societies like Denmark that can implement socialism slowly over time to create effective systems.
But there's an issue with that. The tax rate in Denmark is outrageously high. I've heard people say it costs triple what it would normally cost to buy a car just in Denmark, and the tax rate is incredibly high in Denmark to pay for all the socialized services.
Yes, but when you account for the balance of how much less they pay, because when I say that they pay about half as much per capita on healthcare, let's go back to the healthcare argument again just real quick. That is accounting for how much they pay in taxes. They don't really pay much outright. That is, they pay half as much in their included taxes as we do outright to insurance companies.
Okay, all right. It sounds like we have exceeded the interest in time on that question. So we're going to move on now. This next question is again for Eric. Why do you believe capitalism is more preferable to socialism? And then after your answer, I'm going to ask the same question, only, more structured, onto why he thinks socialism is more preferred for his rebuttal. So, why do you think that capitalism is more preferable to socialism?
Mostly because in capitalism, everyone gets what they earn. But there is some imbalance, but there's always an imbalance. It is impossible to have a perfect society. Because if there was a perfect society, well, sign me up for it. Because right now, capitalism is the closest we can get to a good society due to the fact that the other policies, socialism, Jurchen, they are all very much targeting certain people, certain groups in ways that you can't expect or plan for. Even in China, where it's called state capitalism, where the state approves governments, where state approves businesses, you can still grow. While in most socialist countries, it's very much pre-planned. You grow this, you do that, go do that now.
Okay, and your question, Kyle, why do you believe that socialism is more preferable?
Okay, so I have three main reasons why a socialist system works better, right? And I'm going to list them out before I go into them. Greed, injustice in use, and discrimination, right? Because if you look at the capitalist system, it is built upon the idea that people are trying to collect more money. It is basically a big old game of Monopoly. Monopoly is the purest form of capitalism you will ever find. And in Monopoly, what you are trying to do is use your ability to buy properties to bankrupt everyone else so that you come out on top. That is the whole point of capitalism as a whole. You can't have industries in which the companies aren't completing to get on top and get rid of the other people trying to compete with them. So capitalist economies work based on greed. Then you have injustice, which healthcare, when treated like a business, leads to poor people being unable to receive treatments or even being unable to pay for certain treatments. That's not fair to anyone involved, except for maybe the upper class, which can afford all of these treatments, which are life-saving in some situations. Then you get into discrimination, because African Americans, on average, have an employment rate of about 7%, compared to white people, which have an average unemployment rate of about 4% right now. Now, that's not really fair when you consider the fact that they both are in a capitalist society currently in which they need the money to survive, and they need a job to be able to pay for things, right? And then you also look at the fact that about $60,000 per year, that is the average income for a white household, versus $40,000 per year for an African American household. That's, again, the same point. It isn't fair. It doesn't really show equality when you have different rates of people making different money amounts, and it only really shows up when you look at either gender differences or race differences, and that's a problem that you don't really have where you have the people and the country regulating and making sure that everyone has equality.
All right, cool. Cool. All right, so we're going to move on to our next question. Thank you, both of you, for defining your terms. Now, Kyle, you are presenting socialism. What changes would you make to America, who is very capitalistic, in order to make it more socialist, and why?
Okay, there's two big changes that really need to be made to the American system to make it better. Two big changes that involve the socialist system, at least. Healthcare. Healthcare in other countries with socialized medicine works much better. I've talked about Denmark tons. I don't need to really go into depth again. But let's look at another system in which having a socialized system versus a free market system works much better. Prisons. It is disgusting that due to the fact that they reward businesses for having extra prisoners, this leads them to lobby candidates that will support and create laws to put more people in jail. It doesn't work well when you consider that marijuana, when compared to other comparable legal drugs like alcohol and cigarettes, is a Class A drug, which is up there with heroin and other drugs which kill people daily. It doesn't make sense unless you want to consider the fact that many people use marijuana and it allows them to put them in jail, which helps the private prison systems because the private prison systems get rewarded by the government for having extra prisoners. which again leads to the private prison systems then paying candidates and lobbying for candidates who will make these laws harsher on nonviolent drug criminals and other things like that. It also disallows rehabilitation because private prisons want their prisoners to come back, so they're not going to try to make them better citizens in the real world.
All right, and I will allow a rebuttal from our other contestant.
So what you are arguing for is the healthcare change and private prisons, which the healthcare issue is, even if with a centralized healthcare, your taxes are through the roof. And if you look at the tax rate of the United States, we have a very high tax rate. And we still are going into that every year with the government. More spending from the government without raises on taxes, that's going to completely destroy our national budget. And the private prison system, you wish to speak on the private prison, so what you want to talk about is completely getting rid of all private prisons and then forcing everyone to go into government-sanctioned prisons, which if I recall correctly, we already have hundreds of them across the country. There's ex-military bases are being turned into prisons. It's very hard to find a state where there's not at least 10 prisons within a major population area. We have too many prisoners and we have too many prisons. We have the most prisoners per capita in the world, if I recall correctly, which we aren't even the most populated country. We're the third most populated country, and we're third barely compared to the next two. The U.S. has just too many prisoners because of what you said, the laws, but the laws can be changed. Private prisons, while they may not be for the good, they're still for capitalism, which is to get money, which is what every man wants.
And I will allow more time. I saw him out of the corner of my eye getting really tense over here, so
Okay.
we'll expand on this.
Let me start with the healthcare. I've said this before already in this debate, but when you account for how much in countries where they have socialized medicine and socialized healthcare, you account how much they're paying in their taxes. You don't account that outside of their taxes. So when I say people in Denmark pay half as much for healthcare, that is included in their big tax number. They have higher taxes, yes, but if you say extrapolated our tax numbers and included our insurance bills in our taxes, it would be through the roof. It would be insane. But you wouldn't be doing that because that's not how socialized medicine works. It works by the government limiting how much certain medical treatments, certain medicines can cost. Now, if you move back onto the prison system, in which you said that it's inevitable because we have so many prisoners, we only have these many prisoners because we have the private prison companies lobbying certain candidates and backing certain candidates with their money that they get from the government for having extra prisoners to make harsher laws that create the prisoners that give them the money to lobby the candidates to make the harsher laws. It's a vicious cycle that it needs to end at some point. You can't just have something like that ruining lives over decades, which it has been doing, and do nothing about it. That's horrible.
So what you wish to do is completely get rid of the trial by jury, pretty much is what it sounds like, because each person who's put in jail, what are they found? They are found guilty. They take a plea deal. They are, by a court of U.S. law, guilty of the crime they had committed. And they are punished for the crime that they did. Because the government, yes, while it is corrupt, every government is corrupt. I've never heard of an uncorrupt government. Because if you want to talk about lobbying, I call it legal bribery. That's my opinion of it. I hate lobbyists. If you take a lobbying, to me it's just corruption because you're taking a legal bribe. That's just my opinion on lobbying, so I hate them.
Okay. Just after hearing that, first thing, yes, lobbying is horrible. It should be ended immediately. I totally agree. Lobbying and funding candidates through big businesses should not be allowed. It is legal bribery in every sense of the word. But it is a part of American society that right now it would be very difficult to get rid of entirely. Now, if you look at, you said that criminals get tried and they're guilty according to U.S. law. These laws aren't fair. They're not built to be fair. They're built to put extra people in prisons so that the private prisons can get richer because they pay for these candidates to run their campaigns. That is the problem that I have. I don't have problems with murderers going to jail. Obviously, they're doing horrible things. I have problems with Jeff, who goes home with his buddies and smokes some pot, gets caught and gets sentenced to prison for 6 months. That's not okay.
Poor Jeff.
Or if he has too much, he gets sentenced as a dealer, and that's a very serious crime, even though marijuana is a very non-serious drug.
It's the culture of America. Our culture was at one point a very conservative, very Christian nation, and drugs such as that were considered a very illegal. It was known as devil's grass.
We're getting into marijuana territory, which is a debate for another time. So I think we're just going to move on. You've all made wonderful points.
We're not a Christian country anymore.
Yeah, that's why I said
There
it
is
before.
Jesus in this house. All right.
We're not in a
So-
house.
They don't know
Continue.
that. They don't know that.
Continue.
All right. So as for our next question. What? Our cameraman is pointing out that he worships Jesus. So, big round of applause. Taking a nice little intermission here. You can pause the video and grab a snack. It's okay. All right. This next question goes out to Kyle. So, what do you say to those who say that socialism halts progress in ingenuity as opposed to a capitalistic system where independent marketers compete with each other to make better products?
Okay, now that idea is silly, right? Because in a capitalist system, you're fighting to make yourself richer, whereas in a socialist system, you're fighting and innovating to make the group richer. You don't have a different thing pushing you forward because you're a part of the group. You want to benefit the group. In fact, it's even better because you work with other people to benefit the group. Whereas in the capitalist system, you're competing with those people. That causes great minds to not work together. Whereas in a socialist system, they're forced to work together due to the fact that everyone needs to be benefited and everyone is being brought up. It's not, survival of the fittest, because survival of the fittest goes against human nature at this point. We no longer are an animal species like a dog or a cat. We have developed sophisticated society, and sophisticated society shouldn't be like a wolf's den.
All right, and I will allow a rebuttal from you.
With the competition, yes, geniuses don't work together, but that's because they want to do it their own way. With you saying they're going to be forced to work together, that's going to pretty much limit what they can do in a way that they don't want. If they don't like someone, they're going to be forced to work with them and they're not going to care. Look at what Apple's producing. Look at what Android. Look at all those. We have folding phones. Phones you just hold up to your face and it unlocks. We have VR tech. We have all this stuff, and it's because people want to get there first, get their name on it. They're pushing innovation forward for the sole reason of they want to be first, they want to be known for it. Look at the car. Ford, he perfected the assembly line. With the Model T, he rushed with that. Edison, working with the light bulb, he worked on that, and then someone else, a couple months later, they perfected the light bulb. Everything that's been properly done, it's always a competition. We're tied together in our love of just competition. Look at how many wars we fought all in all. We always want to better ourselves. Humanity always does. Humanity loves conflict. It's just, though it is a sad fact, I've seen kids in my school, they love it whenever they hear, oh, there's going to be a fight in school. Yo, I want to get a video of this. Yo, I want to see this. Because humanity loves to watch competition. They want to see tests. They want to see all this. Because in our hearts, in our nature, we are still just, as you said, we're still an animal, but just very deep down.
All right, and do we want to expand on that, or do we think we should move on?
Just a little bit, because
Of course.
first of all, you said that, human conflict such as war is inevitable. Not in my opinion. In my opinion, it is possible to have things like peace. Peace is possible if people were to work together, which is what I'm getting at here. Now imagine if Steve Jobs and Bill Gates work together instead of being competitors. Now imagine if they put their minds together and had one big group of other, everyone working under them, working together to create the new technology instead of competing against each other, in which you lead to copycats and basically the same thing being released year after year. if they were working together and didn't have to worry about competition, they didn't have to worry about being first, they had to worry about instead, doing better jobs at what they're doing, then you'd have great things instead of things that are basically the same. Like the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 8, there's almost no difference. The iPhone 8 and the iPhone 10, the only difference is the screen's a little bit bigger. There's no big difference anymore because companies get complacent with just spitting out new ideas quickly versus having a lot of thought put into their ideas and a lot of effort put into their ideas.
But when they just keep on producing the same thing over and over again, their sales plummet. It's the way that if you don't like something, you're not going to buy it. So if, I already have an iPhone 8, I don't need an iPhone 10, it's the same thing, they're going to make something different for the iPhone 11. They're going to make the screen bigger. It's going to be able to latch onto your arm. It's going to be able to project on stuff. They will try and get you to buy it in a way where they will make it better in different ways to get you to buy it. Humanity, that's what humans will do. They will figure out a way to get around a problem in a way that helps them.
I think we put it to rest there.
All right, I think we can. Yeah, I think we really can just lay that there. All right, we're nearing the end here. Just a few more. Thanks for hanging in with us. Yes, Eric, this one's for you. There are a certain amount of socialist policies in circulation going through Congress right now. Certain ideas that are in the public's head, but a rather prominent one is the taxing of the richer and upper class. Now, what, in your opinion, is the problem with this policy?
I actually do not see a problem with this because if we go back and look at Eisenhower's tax policy, which was a legal tax rate of 90%, but it only had an effective tax rate of roughly 40 or 30% odd, which meant that the rich, those who put into the economy, put into small businesses, donated money, all that, they were helping, and only those who refused to do so, refused to share their wealth, refused to do anything to help the country, paid 90% and their money was forced to help the country. In a way, yes, it could be seen as socialist, but what it is just rebuilding the economy by just taxing and causing you to actually force yourself into the economy in a way that you wouldn't normally do without threat of losing your money.
Okay, so you bring up several things. You bring up that, it's a good idea because of the fact that, if you set the tax rate at like 90%, but then, give them a whole bunch of bonuses off if they, donate and do other things to help, the poor and the economy, you're basically scaring them into having the 90% tax anyway. So, and a 90% tax helping the 90% tax rate helping the, on the upper and richer class, helping the poor people is very socialist policy. It's equality among the classes, and that is the entire goal behind a socialist system. It's to elevate the poor and lower the rich so that they're closer on standing. And taxing them at very high rates, or scaring them with those high rates and giving them giant bonuses if they donate to poor people, is basically the entire argument that I'm going for here.
They're not donating to poor people. What they would be donating to is like for charities, but what they would be is helping small businesses, investing, doing stuff like that, getting the economy going and roaring. Eisenhower, he had a lot of issues with his economy because who did he come after? FDR, Truman, World War II president, Eisenhower. He was a World War II general. They were the three main presidents from World War II. Their economy was, in a lack of better words, in the toilet because of the Great Depression. They were still working on that. They were still fixing the debt from the war. World War II, I believe, is one of the most expensive wars in U.S. history just because of what we had to deploy overseas, how far away it was, how much we had to pay, the fuel. In months, and I think I'm actually reading a book. It was like 100,000 tons of gasoline were sent to the front or something like that a month. And that was just in France. How about we take in Italy, Japan, Africa? We spent a lot of money, so they had to literally fix the economy. It's not scaring them with 90%. It's here, if you don't help and invest in the economy, you're going to be forced to invest in the economy with 90%, and we're going to take your taxes and fix the debt.
Okay. So you're saying that you're not scaring them into helping the poor, you're scaring them into helping the economy. But either way, you also have that 90% which goes to policies which were supported under the Eisenhower administration, right? Because you're taking the Eisenhower administration as gospel, right?
I'm taking it as an example of a tax rate.
Okay, yeah. So if you look at the Eisenhower administration, he didn't, remove the FDR policies or the Truman policies. Those held strong because they were strong policies that used socialist ideals. And this 90% tax rate, if they decided not to send their money themselves into the economy and they decided to keep their money and pay the tax rate, it goes to these programs that weren't fought against under the Eisenhower administration. And that is because the money from the rich, if it's being given to the government, is going to be used to help the poor, because the government is there to, in my opinion, the government is there to make sure that the people don't suffer.
Under Eisenhower, they would had to have been, the taxes don't go to one specific place. In the UK, they have something called a road tax. Their tax does not go to the maintenance of roads, it goes to everything. In the US, that tax would have gone to debt, military spending, roads, government employee salaries, everything. It doesn't go to one place. No, nothing in the economy. It goes everywhere in the economy. It would have gone most of it probably to war debt because, dear Lord, we had a lot of money to fix from that. If I had the numbers for how much World War II cost for America, it would probably be close to $100 billion, I would say, rough. Just with that, just being a rough estimate of just how much it would cost to send everything there.
All right. I think we've exceeded that time. You look very desperate.
There's one thing.
You and your puppy dog eyes.
Him being so urgent about how much debt we accrued in World War II.
We're still paying it off, I think.
Yes. I don't believe so.
We haven't.
I believe that we have accumulated debt over almost our entire nation's history, and we're paying it off. But let me just continue with the World War II thing. Do you have any clue how much money we made off of World War II? It was so lucrative for the American economy because it brought us out of the Great Depression into a golden age.
We were still actually in the Great Depression until, I would say we ended it.
Until we started making tanks and guns to fight in the war, which gave people jobs, which allowed us to have an economy again.
But don't forget, once all the men went to war, it was the women also replaying those jobs. I'm not trying to be sexist here.
Okay, we're going to move on real quick before we say something that could possibly be offensive.
All right,
we are going to
thank
move
you.
on to question 8. This will be our last question for today. We've already kept you sitting here long enough. All right, this one goes out to you, Eric. Are there any socialist policies that you would support and why? And then Kyle, the same question only regarding capitalistic policies. So are there any socialist policies that you would support?
I would support healthcare for all, but only in the sense that you could opt out if you have the money to pay for healthcare insurance, because some people don't want to spend hundreds of dollars. And you would not have to pay the tax on it because you're not directly benefiting, because in my opinion, if you're not benefiting from something which you will never, and you don't wish to benefit, you do not have to pay. And if the rich is taxed at 90%, as I said before, but a healthcare for all system is quite hard to pull off because doctors will be mad, healthcare insurances will be mad, so it must be done in a slow and timely manner, which is quite hard to pull off because it's, oh, healthcare for all? Yeah, no, I'm not going to be a doctor anymore, I'm retiring. Some doctors will do that, many will.
All right, and Kyle, regarding you, are there any capitalistic policies out there that we currently have in place or that other countries have in place or that are just completely hypothetical that you would support and why?
I mean, there are some markets where a socialist identity to that market doesn't make sense. You know, competition is a necessity in some areas. I'm not going to argue that that's not true because almost every economy in history has proven that that is a fact. You can't function without certain areas being free market, but you can't have certain areas like healthcare and prisons, which humans are the goods, being free market. You know, FDR is a great example of this kind of stuff because FDR was, in our history, the closest thing to a socialist president we've ever had. And he used socialist policies in a capitalist system to take us out of the Great Depression. He, boosted businesses whenever he could, but he also fought for, rights for the poor. That was the whole thing behind FDR. That's why he got elected so many times, and that's why people loved him. He was a great example of, what kind of capitalist policies I would support.
Okay, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, that is all the time we have for today. Now, before we go, I'm going to ask each of the two contestants to give a closing argument to sort of wrap up their general argument. Starting first to my right and your left here with our contestant, Kyle Nagy. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, just to sum things up with a lot of what I've said earlier, healthcare, I've said it multiple times, and I have information that shows that people in Denmark, even when you account in their tax brackets and in what they pay tax-wise, even when you include those numbers, they pay half as much for healthcare. When you look at prisons, you see that the private prisons, it's a vicious cycle. They pay the politicians to make laws that put people in prison to give them more money to pay the politicians. It's a vicious cycle. You have that problem. And then you also have a lot of what he brought up in the beginning about, the Soviet Union and Venezuela. You have the problem of a socialist state, which is the American idea of a socialist state, which is a scary dictatorship like the Soviet Union or Venezuela, where authoritarian dictatorships rule over a blind wall of saying that they are a socialist country. They don't really fight for socialist ideals. They fight for one person holding all the power, which isn't the goal of anybody fighting for socialist policies in America. And modern socialist Americans just want socialist integration into a free market economy that works, like in Denmark. That's the whole point of social democracy. And that sums up basically what I said today.
Okay, thank you. And now for our closing argument from our capitalistic representative, Erika Applebaum.
With what he said, you need to learn from your history. You need to learn from the past. Because as I have said, if you do not learn from your history, you are doomed to repeat it. The USSR, it was a socialist state. The government controlled the economy. As you have said, it was what you would call socialism in the sense that it was the society, social, runs everything, which in my sense and according to actual historians, it is a socialism. It is socialism. As such, it is a perfect example of why socialism is quite hard to pull off because humanity is meant to compete. We have the Olympics. We have all these competitive sports. UFC and boxing, karate. We wish humanity is not meant to help everyone. It's meant to help who we want to help and fight because that's just test ourselves. That's what humanity, I've never seen someone really just dislike just testing themselves against another person of the same thing. I know that I like test myself against people with chess and stuff like that. It's what people want to do. They want to see if they can get better. They want to see if the technology can get better. Humanity wants to innovate. They want to change. Socialism would force them to work together with people they don't want to work together with and would make it hard to innovate and change with that.
All right, thank you, Eric Applebaum and Kyle Nagy for coming here today. And ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have for today. I hope you enjoyed the debate. We thank you for coming to wherever this is posted. And please don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below on who you think's argument was a little stronger. And I am Daniel Braille for Minds of America.